Hello, hello. It's time to begin. Hello and welcome everyone to my quote unquote recital. Though this is not the culmination I pictured for my undergraduate education, I'm nonetheless proud to appear before you today and excited to share with you some of the fruits of my many years studying the musical arts. I feel humbled and blessed to see so many familiar faces, and in this case, names, in the virtual crowd, and I am beyond excited to share my work with you. In the last few years here at Kenyon, I have been studying, thinking, and developing ideas about myself, about the world, and particularly about music, and I have each one of you to thank in some way. It is you from whom I have learned, with whom I have discussed, and on whom I have tested my ideas. And today, I have the privilege to share some of that product with you. I hope you will be proud of what you see here, because it is as much your work as it is mine. I've been planning this recital for over a year. I scouted and analyzed numerous choral pieces of vastly different styles and eventually chose a well-rounded program. I slowly assembled a group to perform it, developed rehearsal strategies and processes, scheduled meetings and rehearsals, reserved spaces, printed the music, all 900 pages, and eagerly awaited our first rehearsal. In all, I had chosen 8 pieces, hopeful but expecting only to sing 6, unless the group sight reading was at some unprecedented level. One piece I had known I wanted on the program since 2018 was Tomás Luis de Victoria's O Magnum Mysterium. Published in 1572, it was one of the 2 earliest on the program, and it was the first of them that I ever sang myself. The theme of my program was choral music that changed my perspective, be it a harmonic, emotional, or philosophical perspective, pieces that got me thinking about music in a new way. I wanted to share these transformations with everyone I could, and I still do. Victoria studied in Rome for a few years with the traditional masters, but was born and worked mostly in central Spain. In O Magnum Mysterium, a classic example of his work, you can hear him play with the fundamentals in a way few others did at the time. The piece is in D minor, but makes liberal use of E flats and distantly related key centers. In addition to these many incredible moments of harmonic tension and release, the piece is characteristically Renaissance in its capacity for diverse interpretation. I've heard this piece performed by no fewer than 30 different groups, and I've never heard more than 3 or 4 of the same things happen in any 2 renditions. The great mystery that the title refers to is the newborn Jesus, and a sensitive performance of the piece is able to capture the sheer awe of the Son of God being born on earth, while also conveying the delicacy of the subject, a woman and her infant child asleep in a manger. The other early piece in the program was Francisco Guerrero's Canite Tuba, published in 1570. This piece was challenging in an entirely different way, the purely technical sense. The piece is fast and energetic, and thus requires the conductor to keep the singers on the very edge of their seats. There's simply so much going on in the piece at all times that it does not suffice to be living in the moment, as one would wish to with the Victoria. In the Guerrero, there is no time to think, only to act. The conductor must be intimately familiar with each individual line, so that every exciting moment can be brought out to its full effect. The centerpiece of the program was Johannes Brahms' motet O Heiland reiß die Himmel auf. It was published in 1878, paired with another sacred motet, Warum ist das Licht gegeben, whose popularity today overshadows the former. To me, the single most impressive element of O Heiland Reiß, besides its exquisite counterpoint, is actually Brahms's wildly effective use of word painting throughout the entire work. The piece is strophic, with the melody set as a cantus firmus, and is unconventionally set in the Dorian mode, which I believe is a metaphor for the suffering of the world, the minor scale, with the promise of a brighter future, the raised sixth. The first verse places considerable emphasis on the word reiß, which means to tear, in this case to tear open the heavens, so that the Savior might come down. The verse is very forward-moving and intense, reflecting the desire of a people praying to be saved. The second verse turns this intensity on its head as the text reads, "O God, a dew from heaven pour. In that dew, O Savior, flow." To complement this, Brahms changes from what was previously motion by third to motion by step, smoothing out all of the vocal lines. This calls for a drastic change in conducting style as well, from assertive to flowing. The third verse puts us back in a similar environment to the first, the text reading, "O earth, burst forth, that mountain and valley turn all green." After the talk of heaven in the first two verses, Brahms lowers our gaze to the earth by giving the melody to the tenors, and to have the music burst forth, he employs a bombastic, repeating rhythmic theme. But this verse isn't just tearing and bursting forth as the first was. Equally important is what bursts forth from the earth. The text reads, "O erd, herfür dies Blümlein bring," which a German-speaking friend of mine translates to, "O earth, bring up this cute little flower." Thus, the third verse requires some of the force of the first verse, but also a delicate application and appreciation of beauty, similar to what we find in the second. The fourth verse is a complete change of pace, turning from the glorious world we desire to the one we live in now. The text reads, "Here we suffer the greatest need. Bitter death watches us." In this verse, the melody is given to the basses, and it is modified to reflect a purely minor mode, the minor 5. Above, the other parts weave carefully through thick chromatic harmonies, mostly outlining diminished sonorities. Brahms also changes the time signature here from 3/2 to 4/2, creating the illusion of slowing the tempo. In this verse, more than in any other piece of music, I have felt what conducting teachers refer to as movement through deep water. A great deal of focused energy is required to move even a short distance, and there is a sort of swirling that makes the environment unclear. The fifth and final verse combines elements of the previous verses, but now in a new context after the journey we've been taken on, and thus the conducting should show recall and reformation as well. We see some of the force of the first and third verses, some passionate vocal lines from the second and third, and some of the same tension as in the fourth. This tension culminates in a short but powerful section of amens, a double canon with the bottom parts in inversion of the top parts, all outlining a dominant flat 9 chord. To me, this is symbolic of the final moments in one's life. Faced with bitter death, one can only see doom reflected in the dominant chord of F minor. The raised sixth is gone here and has given way to the dissonant flat 9th of the C chord, but after a short, albeit painful trial, we arrive in the promised land by cadencing on F major. Those who knew me and who know me now know that the one musical activity I partake in probably more than any other is a cappella arranging. And Jack Halloran's 1986 arrangement of the traditional spiritual Witness is a masterclass in this respect. It is hard to underestimate how much I've learned from this piece. A great pitfall for many large-scale arrangements like this one is overcomplication, but Halloran makes sure to give the melody top priority at every turn. Throughout the piece, he takes us through many changes in mood, texture, and timbre, all the while injecting some small but noteworthy moments of imaginative harmony, most notably a recurring flat 6 dominant chord, but the melody is kept on top of the texture at all times. Similarly melodic is Eric Whitacre's 2001 composition, With a Lily in Your Hand. This was one of the first choral pieces I enjoyed so much that I never forgot my part, to this day. There's a lot to like about the piece, from its imaginative harmony alluding to the Spanish origins of the poet, to the constant shifts of mood, all artfully done. But what has always struck me most about this piece, and what I most consciously take away from it, is how smooth it feels, despite the 40 time signature changes in 65 measures of music. It is difficult to get used to at first, without a doubt, but with a little practice, you realize that it is much harder to look at each individual measure than it is to look at larger segments grouped together, which is the way music is meant to be looked at. In this way, the piece helped me practice understanding things from a larger picture, which has helped me in other pieces as well as in my everyday life. Finally, I will say a few words about Kyrillos Krek's setting of Psalm 104, Ki damuhin isandat, before I play our group's rendition of it for you all. In contrast to the Whittaker, this was one of the pieces of the set that I most recently encountered. As a lover of jazz, I am easily excited by the D9 sharp 11 and F sharp major 13 chords found in the Whittaker and the flat 6 dominant chord found in the Halloran. So when this simple psalm setting appeared in a music folder of mine, I briefly looked it over, noted the occasional G major 11 chord in it, and moved on. I didn't know at the time that Crick's short piece would become one of my all-time favorite choral pieces, and not just for the G major 11 chord. No, to me, the most meaningful moment in the entire piece is an E minor chord, just a simple E minor triad, close voiced from the middle bass E to the high soprano G. It is one of the most beautiful moments I've ever experienced in choral music. This is what I admire most about Crick's setting, the depth and intensity of emotion he displays with such a simple framework, not a single accidental in the whole piece. Just a bass and tenor drone on the tonic triad that says, "I'm here for you," while the soprano and alto sing a sweet, welcoming, thankful melody above. Then the soprano and alto take the supportive role, while the tenor and bass sing a prayer in a close, low-voiced four chord. All four parts come together to climax on that otherworldly E minor chord, and finally sing the same words together, now and forever, Amen. We then just wind down to where we were at the beginning, but with a newfound sense of joy and contentedness. In my conducting, it was this profound calm that I tried to embody. A confidence not with what one might be able to do, but a confidence with what one has already done. The Crick setting is much like a lullaby, and if the singers understand that, they will need very little specific direction, and will simply sing automatically as beautifully as they know how. Now, I'm not sure how the quality of the audio will be on your end or the video, so we'll play it now, but I will also share the link in the chat. And we will listen another time a little bit later, and you may choose to take that time to listen on your own computer. But for now, I will take us over to YouTube.
Idamuhi sandat, kide turolet sinat, isant muyum alzaolet sun, kide turolet sinat, qui solenon siduleisat, saector August Suleisat, Kesaque coletenut, Aolgu isale poiale, Pyhale vaimulle Myria igapes. Amen. Kesaque coletenut.
This, of course, reminds me that being under quarantine as we are, nothing I've stated so far turned out the way I expected it to. So this would be a good time to explain exactly how I modified the project I've just explained under the apparent circumstances and what I did to keep my musical principles in effect as much as was possible. The group surpassed my expectations at almost every turn, and I could not be more proud of their hard work or more thankful for their dedication, from beginning to unexpected end. But this unexpected end called for changes to be made, and we had to oblige. First, I had to reestablish exactly who would be singing. Given the socioeconomic situation of the world right now, I decided to firmly establish that participation in the choir was from this point optional, so that the singers could focus on their necessities. While it pains me to see the work of so many committed singers go to waste, keeping the environment stress-free was always my top concern. For my ensemble, the whole point of singing at this time was to relieve stress, so of course I never wanted my project to be a source of tension for anyone. I had the group vote on which pieces to do and invited everyone to sing one, two, or none. In the end, we were left only with the crick. The main reason is that it was homophonic and was therefore the easiest, and as I mentioned, it was also the most intuitive for the singers. The Brahms was always out of the question due to its extreme difficulty, and the Whittaker suffered the same fate. The Halloran Spiritual would have been ineffective in the smaller group I was left with, and we had not learned much of the Guerrero yet, and with the Victoria, I knew that the level of intimacy required to make the piece successful would simply be impossible in the new medium. After asking for opt-in participants, I continued to remind everyone that it was perfectly fine not to sing, and because in our time at Kenyon I had made such a concerted effort to make the singers internally motivated, I wasn't worried about getting enough volunteers, and I did. The next step was actually the hardest of all, preparing the pieces for the singers. For this, it came in handy that I had made my own edition of each piece, and I used these to create two scores, one for the singers to read and one for them to listen to the playback of. First, I created the playback version, an audio rendition of the score using virtual instruments as close as I could get to a performance conducted by me. This was difficult not only because at times I had to decide between 90 or 91 beats per minute, delicately craft retardandos, and so on, but more so because I'm not used to making such dictatorial, incontestable decisions in ensembles. If I could have one wish granted, I would ask for the chance to go back and talk to the singers about the piece, ideally after giving them some time to listen and think it over for themselves. The single most important factor for a successful and enriching choral experience is that the singers feel a personal connection to the music. And while this is not impossible to achieve virtually, it is certainly more difficult by many degrees of magnitude, and given our time constraints, it was impossible. Anyway, after carefully creating my playback version of the score, I modified it to make a score that was easy to read while still providing ample information about the minutiae of the playback. I then uploaded the playback MIDI and the reading score to a Google Drive folder so the singers could practice while I recorded myself conducting. This task was also rather upsetting because I knew that the MIDI recording I had just produced would make me partly obsolete. In a way, I had explained away the music so that nothing was left to be done live. But the one thing that was truly lacking, apart from tone in the recording, was the dynamics, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that most of the singers seemed to be following me in that regard, though I did also put a few more markings into the scores. When I had captured a satisfactory video of my conducting, I repaired it with the original playback audio for a clearer sound and added it to the Google Drive, accompanied by an instructional note on how to record. In short, they were to read from their score while watching me conduct along to the playback audio. This would give them, as much as possible, the feeling of singing with a full group. The sound would play through their headphones, and they would sing into a microphone so as to capture only their sound. Then came the most technically difficult part, mastering the audio, for which I used the program Audacity. First, I combed each recording individually, silencing breaths and looking for errors, whether in intonation, tempo, or flow, for example, not breathing where I had asked for a breath to be taken. All of these, to some degree, were fixable. For intonation, the program has a built-in pitch shifter, and for tempo and flow, I could cut down and even sometimes elongate certain small segments. Less easy to fix, but still possible with Kenyan ingenuity, were problems with the microphone itself. Sometimes there was background noise or crackling, but the chief problems were high soprano notes, which gave feedback, and low bass notes, which were not always picked up. Once feedback is given in the recording, it is difficult, if not impossible, to take away, especially given my limited audio mastering experience. But the low bass notes were rather easy, though tedious, to fix, especially given that for half the piece, the basses only sing one note. Thus, my solution was to copy a short sample of the bass singing the note, paste it many times in a row, and then trim the clip to perfectly align the waveform, making a smooth sound. When I was satisfied with each individual recording, I added them all to a single file and began aligning everything in time, balancing, fixing more intonation, silencing more breaths, and making sure cutoffs and onsets were together. I also did a little bit of panning to flesh it out and to address intonation issues that were too small or too numerous to be fixed without driving myself insane. It doesn't make everything perfect, but you can get around a lot of tuning issues by panning the sounds to opposite ears. Thus, I have one soprano, alto, tenor, and bass on each side, and a tenor, alto, and the filler sounds like the artificial bass voice in the middle. Finally, when I was happy finalizing the audio, I took to the video editor, aligning each video in time with the final audio and laying out the faces on the screen, which the number of singers I had was actually perfect for. Me in the center, 2 on top and bottom, and 3 on each side. It even almost perfectly matches the panning. And now we will take a second listen. Please use the YouTube link that I pasted in chat. I will reshare it again, and we will reconvene in a few minutes. Listen to it and come back here, and I will mute and stop my video, and I'll turn it back on when it's time to go.
Idamuhi sandat, kide tudolet sinat, isant muyu balsaolet sun, kide tudolet sinat, qui soledon sinut levisat, saecter August eleisat, quae colletenut, aulgu isale poiale, puale vai mule Livia Igapes. Aulgus Saque coletat, que saque colet tenus.
deep connections to their art. I'll now outline how I try to inspire ensemble members from the perspective of a group leader. This will be coupled, of course, with some of my own methods for teaching the music itself. In many ways, the two are inseparable, but in others, there are almost innumerable paths of approach. The first rehearsal with a group is always difficult, especially for a college group, but if it goes well, it will, of course, set a good precedent for the rest of the semester or year. To be open, relaxed, and comfortable puts the ensemble members at ease. This starting point is crucial because it eliminates any kind of pedestal that the leader might be on, thus building a foundation of trust. I always have the ensemble members introduce themselves and share some sort of fun fact or facts, so that outside of rehearsal or during a break, those who are unacquainted can find common ground. I like to give the ensemble a little bit of time to goof around at the start so that this is even easier. And if there are members who are new to the ensemble, or especially who are not well known to me, I will always personally introduce myself in the new context and make myself available to them so that they feel welcome. After the group has released some of the stress of entering a new environment, it's time to sing. The singers should start, of course, by warming up. At the beginning of the process, it is advisable to keep the warm-up exercises on the simpler side so that the ensemble can focus more on each other. But the warm-ups should increase in difficulty as time passes. I always start with the most common and simplest, but later on I like to introduce things like the major scale in a round, Dorian and Lydian exercises, and intonation exercises. For a less serious group, however, it might be more effective to have a warm-up that is simply fun. This sets a more easygoing precedent for the rehearsal, while in some cases still exercising the more advanced singers. Finally, it is time to look at the music proper, the pieces for the program. There are, of course, a myriad of ways to go about learning the set, but a few rules of thumb prevail. It is almost inarguably a good idea to start learning the hardest piece or pieces early on, so that the group has the maximum possible amount of time to learn them. But this also leaves the potential for the group to start out frustrated on day one. To avoid this, I prefer to start with an easy piece and do introductory work on a hard piece. Having the group listen to a recording is often a good idea, as it is likely to get the singers excited about how they could sound, and it allows them to more easily conceptualize and imagine the music from what they see on the page, which for a difficult piece might be rather complicated. From here, a balancing act ensues. You don't want to learn things strictly in reverse order of difficulty, which could leave the last few pieces feeling rushed and not getting their deserved attention. And you don't want to learn anything too fast, such that you perfect it early and then leave it on the back burner while the singers slowly forget it. The rule of thumb I've come up with is that you should not leave any more than 10 or 15% of the music to the last 20% of rehearsal time. Since the Pareto principle states that about 80% of your time will be spent learning 20% of the music, this leaves time to learn all the hardest material early while still leaving some squeezed in time at the end for learning something easy while perfecting the whole program. It is also important to bear in mind that these percentages are merely guides, and the more efficient you are in the rehearsal room, the more wiggle is available when you will probably need it most. And efficiency is top priority in a rehearsal. The way I think about it is this. In a group of 20, a 1-hour rehearsal is not just 1 hour out of your life, but without even considering the surprising difficulty of scheduling with college students, it's 1 hour out of each of their lives as well, thus making the rehearsal almost an entire day of universe combined time, if you will. This concept is especially scary on a smaller scale. By the same standard, 3 minutes of rehearsal is an entire hour. Thus, out of respect for the singers, it is imperative that every moment of the rehearsal be spent making progress, and hopefully significant progress. With this in mind, allow me to take you through some imagined situations from such a rehearsal, pretending that we are going through a piece in real time. We are singing Eric Whitacre's With a Lily in Your Hand. The piece is fast, with generally unfamiliar harmony and many tricky individual lines amid the changing time signatures. The brief introduction is fairly easy, the words line up with a typical 4 pattern, but immediately after, we change to 6/8, 2/4, 8/8, 3/4, and so on. In order to avoid getting caught up in the numbers, we will speak our rhythms together, first very slowly, then less slowly, and then at tempo or almost. Then we will add pitches. The sopranos will need some help with their line at measure 6, so we will sing it alone while the group stays active and engaged by counting eighth notes for them. I will play along on the piano if necessary. One soprano will not be able to get it. They will probably miss the D natural in measure 6, so I will tell them it is the same as the bass note in that measure while I play both parts to demonstrate. I'll make a promise. If you listen to the basses there, you will sing the right note. I know you can do it. When we get to page 2 and the sopranos begin the melody, I will remind them that we have to be expressive, especially with notes tied over the bar line, of which there are many here. Some astute tenors, altos, and/or basses might think to match the sopranos, and I will invite them all to do so, saying I noticed so-and-so doing it, and it was a very effective choice. Then measures 20 and following will give us trouble because of a dotted quarter tied into a 5/4 bar, so we will once again speak our rhythm slowly, perhaps on numbers first, then transition back to words, and then speed the tempo back up to normal. At least one person will continue to miss it, probably a bass, because they don't change notes the same way as the others do. But when they continually arrive at the next phrase too early, they will eventually fix it on their own, and when they do, I will smile at them and say, good catch. Measures 30 and following will take a lot of time because of thick harmony and somewhat tricky soprano line, and I will show that it does not surprise me, even if it does, that this section is taking so long, and I will assure the group that we will get it through repetition, which we will. The section uses a whole tone scale, which only gets easier the more you hear it. This section will frustrate the group for sure, but in measure 32, the altos and tenors have a fun melodic response on the word butterflies that I'm excited to get a little silly with. Anyone who's been on stage in their life will know the request, give me more and let me pull you back if it's too much, and I will ask this here. They may forget once in a while, but they will remember laughing at it and will hopefully come to enjoy it. This should be sufficient to illustrate a few points I have. It is worth noting, by the way, that I never share this universe combined time business with the singers. To them, I only say that I like to work fast. The specifics are only useful in the hands of the leader, and otherwise it leads only to stress, which I attempt to keep out of my process at almost any cost. For this reason, I was a little bit nervous to even include this in my public presentation. On occasion, stress can be a useful tool, but 9 times or more out of 10, these occasions are the result of poor planning earlier in the process, resulting in a shortage of time with an excess in difficulty or amount of work. Since it is fruitless to try to erase the problem of time, we might as well work with it where we can. However, it is possible to erase, or at least to limit, the other 2 factors, amount and difficulty of the work. Part of this, of course, comes from being efficient, as I've said, but efficiency fixes problems like these more on a case-by-case basis. Another strategy has a more far-reaching and universal effect, and that is to instill the singers with confidence and courage. Amid what I hope is the ultra-efficient atmosphere I presented before, there are a few key tools at work, the importance of which I cannot understate, so I will present them in stark bullet point format. Number 1, don't use good and bad. Use effective and ineffective. The value terms good and bad complicate things when it comes to musical expression. Our objective as musicians is to convey the purpose of the music we're performing to an audience, and because of the personal nature of music, this gets more difficult the more people are involved. In a rehearsal, we don't want to call someone's heartfelt rendition a bad effort simply because it is inconsistent with the rest of the group's view. We want to affirm them while also redirecting their energy, calling it ineffective at producing some desired result. Number 2, don't say I like or I want. Say the music wants. As a conductor, to say I want X from the music is misleading for the group. It's not really what you mean. What you mean is, I think X would be most effective in conveying the purpose of the music. And therefore, you shouldn't talk about what you want, but rather what the music wants, or more specifically, what the music requires. Third and finally, don't use I, use we. From all my years as a choral singer, and in fact from all my years as a musician, this is the single most important lesson I can offer anyone who works in an ensemble. I was given this lesson, Don't Use I, Use We, by Dr. Brian O'Connell at the University of Massachusetts Lowell 2 years ago. And while it wasn't clear to me at first, I decided just to trust him and just to see what would happen if I took his advice. Today, I am a completely different musician, due in part to a great number of things, but in large part to this one principle. It is difficult to explain and impossible to provide an exact list of things that my use of this principle has changed, but without a doubt, I saw and continue to see a remarkable difference, not only in the social and musical unity of the ensembles I'm a part of, but also in my own view of them and my view of music itself. Allowing this concept to permeate everything I do has shifted my focus away from myself and my singers and onto the music. It forces me to take responsibility for all my musical actions and ideas. And above all, it gives me a clear path to my goal from the start of any musical project and guides me in working with others. Staying true to this principle, simply thinking we instead of I, has unlocked new potential for musical expression within me, and I've made it my mission to spread that. Unfortunately, though not unexpectedly, I now have to report that the virtual approach I was forced to take was patently ineffective in these respects. The question of effectiveness brings my mind to the original chorus, the Greek chorus, a unified group whose purpose is to comment on the moral issue raised by the play. Kenyan students across the country now bemoan the current status of the college, saying they feel like they aren't learning anything. It is remarkable but true. Our physical separation is the very reason for this. The technology we currently have does not allow us to engage in dialogue and discourse in the way that is necessary for real learning to take place in person, and musical ensembles are no exception to this. In fact, I find it doubtful that we will ever have the technology to replicate the choral experience from separation like this, for the simple reason that music is based in time, and it takes time for information to cross space. We can see in normal circumstances that even across the space of a single football field, it is difficult for a group of musicians to make cohesive art with one another, even when no technology is involved. So I'm persuaded that as long as technology of the kind I and the singers used is included, creation of the kind of art we attempted is impossible. Of course, it should not go unnoticed that I'm glad to have produced something rather than nothing. From the beginning of the virtual process, I knew it would be impossible for me to be satisfied because of everything I've stated. What is more disappointing to me is that the singers, who committed themselves to my project, who worked hard and made sacrifices for me, do not get the opportunity to complete their work. I assume it must be nice for them to see their faces and hear their voices on the video, but that person is not them. It's a simulation or a reflection. So I know it's not as fulfilling as it should be. And that is what pains me most about this whole situation. In a group setting like a choir, musical fulfillment rests on the health of the group, which is exactly why I value the social well-being of my members so highly. This well-being enables the group members to be comfortable enough with one another to share musical ideas, which we should not forget are very personal. In our situation, the health of the group was more or less immaterial given the other issues facing us, and as a result, I had to open myself more than usual and communicate more clearly than I ever have before. And yet, as much of a failure as the virtual medium is, I think it is entirely necessary. Even though it cannot completely fulfill anyone, it can still satisfy the desire to create, and to some extent, the desire to share in creation. And as I said before, I'm glad to have something rather than nothing. Thus, I think for virtual ensembles to be most successful, the level of communication among the performers needs to increase significantly. The main danger of the virtual situation is that a given project can come to feel less like a group effort and more like a personal effort, more of an I project than a we project. Under normal circumstances, there are already ensembles that operate, both with and without conductors, with special emphasis placed on discussion of the material. New York City's Orpheus Chamber Ensemble is a prime example of this, and even Kenyon's chamber singers have come to embrace the concept in recent years, and I hope they will continue to. It is crucial that every ensemble member feel that they have input and that what they have to say is heard, valued, and appreciated. While there are almost no musical principles that can survive this virtual transition unharmed, providing ensemble members with love, support, and encouragement can keep the group together and even strengthen it. One of the most contentious topics in the field of ensemble rehearsal is control. How much control you give to yourself versus the singers. But I think the issue is a little bit deeper. It's not just about who has control, but who has control over what. And I have found that when you give the ensemble a great deal of control over the musical product, the ensemble will be happy to give control over the rehearsal environment to you, which is of course what allows us to be efficient in producing the musical product. This is why you should not use terms good and bad. This is why you should not say I like or I want, and this is why you say we instead of I. Because the music is not yours. The music is not mine. The music belongs to the group, and the ensemble leader should act as such. That is why it gives me such pleasure to share this presentation with you all. I do not view this as a celebration of myself and my progress. While these things are undoubtedly worth celebrating, it is the context that matters most. I view this as giving thanks to you all, because you have made my progress something worth celebrating. Thank you. I will now take some questions. You can raise your hands or, oh yes, or type in the chat as well. I see some hands. Why don't we take one from Emily?
Yeah, which video software did you use when you were editing your virtual choir, and did you have to sort of look into different options for that?
The one that I used is called Filmora. I think it's called Filmora Wondershare or something. It's not free, but I was able to use it without a watermark by disconnecting my computer from the internet. So if you're willing to make some perhaps moral sacrifices, then that could be a good option. Anyone else? Aha, I see a hand from Mr. Bob Milnickel. Good to see you, Bob.
Thank you for the presentation. You said that you did a little bit of intonation correction and some other tweaking when working with individual parts. Was that something that you took for granted was going to need to be part of the process, or did you go through a decision process about whether to leave the audio in relatively raw form and just work on combining it? You know, maybe take out background hum or feedback, but let the performance be the performance.
Yes, that was actually not one of the greater things that I debated with myself, but I did decide as much as I could to keep the singers, to keep their files the way that they had sent them to me, because I knew that they were happy with what they had sent me. But there were a few cases where things were flat by almost a half step entirely, or in some cases a whole step. There were no wrong notes ever, I don't think, but there were just a couple cases when I knew that the musical product could be greatly enhanced by a small edit on my part, and I deemed that worth it. Anyone else? I thought, yes, I saw a question from Jeff.
So I wanted to, hold on, I'm so sorry. I just got a phone call as I was about to ask you a question. Okay, now I'm good. I am curious as to your thoughts about balancing being an ensemble leader with also being a peer of the members of the ensemble, like the specific situation of being a college student leading other college students in musical endeavors. And I know that this is something that you and I both have experience with, not only in our comps projects, but in many other things. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Yes, that is also something that I've found somewhat tricky to navigate. But in the end, I've found, and I don't know if this is the end all be all, but what's been useful in my experience is viewing myself as much as possible as simply an equal member of the ensemble who just happens to have been selected to, as I said, make things more efficient. As much as you can, I mentioned at one point, taking away any sort of pedestal, whether it might be, on the basis of ego, or if people just view you on a pedestal because you're in a position of power, being the conductor, taking that away as much as possible is crucial, because everyone in the ensemble is working toward one musical product. So to have two approaches is simply less reliable. You want to have a unified approach as much as possible. So putting yourself on the exact same level as the singers is the best way, I think. And as I said, it just so happens that you are the one who's good at making things go quickly. Oh yes, also you might want to type in the chat if you have a question, because I can't see everyone on the screen.
Ethan,
Yes,
this is Vince.
it is so good to hear from you, Vince. How are you?
Good. Hi, everyone. This is Vince Peterson, and I am representing Ethan's extended musical family in Choral Chameleon in New York City. And I just wanted to say that we're all very, very proud of him and the work that he's done. And I'm deeply moved by the way you're talking about the role of a conductor in the world. I'm deeply moved by your selflessness and the quality of the work that you've done here. And I wanted to say that in front of everybody here and offer you my sincerest support in this very uncommon time as you face the culmination of years of your work and your labor in conjunction with a world circumstance that does not allow us all to celebrate you in the way that we would like to. So my question for you is, what's next?
Well, I hope to become a music teacher, if any of you were in doubt about that. And I must thank you, Vince, for your support. It really means a lot to me to hear you say that. And as I said at the beginning, I owe a lot of it to you. The next step is I'm looking at graduate schools, trying to find programs that would work for me. But of course, given the current situation of the world, it's very unclear what path exactly I will take. I see a question from Doc. He says, out of all the pieces you planned, which are you sorriest not to have performed? One of them that I didn't even mention was a song by Monteverdi that I just think is uproarious and fun, but I won't choose that one. From my own perspective, I would have loved to had a chance to work at the Guerrero, because I actually think that is where my greatest growth was available to take place. I think there was the most for me to learn. purely from a technical standpoint. But the Whitaker, it's a bit of a split between the Whitaker and the Halloran, not just because I like both of them and they have a history for me, but also because the singers really liked them. Of the ones that we were voting on, it was between the Crick, which was pretty unanimous, and then the Whitaker and the Halloran, the Witness. And I really, as I said, I just hate to take something that the singers enjoy and that they worked hard on and that they looked forward to away from them. So if I could have done 3, it would have been them. And Dana has a question, of course.
Hey, Ethan. I just wanted to say congratulations. I'm so proud of all of this. So I represent Ethan's extended music family from the Sartiano choral conducting workshop in Italy. And I also have learned from Professor Brian O'Connell at UMass Lowell. And it really touched my heart to hear you say that, because that was the philosophy that really drove our rehearsals at school, and especially in Sartiano. So first and foremost, congratulations, and thanks for letting me be a part of your virtual choir. My question for you is, I was wondering, what were your thoughts about being whether it's a choral ensemble leader, orchestral band leader, before you kind of learned Brian's philosophy of I versus we? Did you have any thoughts about that, or did it just kind of not really enter your mind? And I'm curious to see more of the impact post that lesson.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that the teaching that he gave to me, and that he's not the only one. People like Vince, you have also shared this with me.
Absolutely.
That's been very transformational for me, because before, I'm almost ashamed to talk about it, but before I had seen groups that I was in front of, and luckily there weren't many of them because it was earlier on, I had seen groups that I was sort of commanding at the time as vehicles for my musical expression, and it was just sort of a very selfish thing. So when I heard him talk about this I versus we business, I wasn't, it wasn't what I was used to. So I wasn't about to instantly latch onto it and say, "Oh, that's perfect. I've been waiting for someone to tell me that." I had to try it out for myself, and I'm glad that I did almost blindly trust him, because it simply turned out to be one of the greatest lessons that I've ever been taught. Jono has a question, if I have the time, which I do. I'll say 2 more questions, and then we'll let you all go back to your busy lives.
Hi, Ethan. Great to see you in action. I miss the Kenyan community. My question for you is, I guess, as a leader of an ensemble, going forward in a time when, it might be dangerous for ensembles to gather in the near future, how do you expect to engage with your desire to want to lead a group of musicians in creating music? Because I think, the spirit of creativity in this time is so important, even when we can't be together. How do you foresee bringing people together with music?
For this, I think that's the main reason that the unsatisfying virtual format is so necessary, is I don't really see any other way that it can be done for the foreseeable future. And while it has so many drawbacks, the one thing that it keeps is it keeps the hope alive, and it keeps us remembering what it was like when we were together, and it simply keeps us looking forward to that. So I think we as artists just have to hang on and know that we have so much more within us that we don't get to share in this time, so that when we come out, we kind of explode and we say, "Oh, I've been missing this and that, and I want to do all these things with all these people." And that we kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit like we're sort of charging up now and waiting to be let loose.
Absolutely.
And the last question will be from Emily.
So I know that you compose and arrange a good amount as well, and I wondered how your very extensive conducting experience and conducting study has sort of influenced some of the compositional choices that you make.
Yes, that's an interesting question. One thing that I've come more recently, that sort of more recently came into contact with me is thinking about things in terms of the piano. And so you have, what the best way that I can explain that is there are certain, and I'm still learning about this myself, this is by no means complete, but there are certain things that the workings of the piano can teach you about the relationships between parts in choral music. And I think that before I started to learn about this, I could see it, but not recognize what I saw. And so I'm glad that that has been open to me. But I think the greatest way that I see it is in relationships between voices. Each, you have a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, 4-part arrangement, maybe with a soloist. And each part has its function. And you simply have to understand how each of those parts works in relationship to the others. I know I'm not being very clear on this. That's an unsatisfying answer to you as well as to myself, but I think very functionally in that way. And this business with the piano is kind of helping me see a little bit more clearly into that. Aha. Well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you all so much for coming to this. It really is just such an incredible experience to see all of your faces, all of you who have taught me so well over the years, who have taught me so much. I thank Vince for coming, for representing Choral Chameleon. I thank Claudia for coming and Ali Emmerich for representing some of my high school theater experiences. All of my teachers, my professors who are here, I'm so glad to see you. I simply have so many people. I don't know how to thank you all, but I guess it's time to sign off, and I hope to hear you all soon. I'll send the link in chat to the video one more time, and I'll share it on Facebook as well. So if you want to take a look at that, it'll be there. All right. Thanks all for coming. Goodbye.